Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of TBS EFM's Inside Out. Well, exactly 20 years ago in 1994, the United Nations Children's Fund, or Unicef as it's better known, was established in Korea to advocate the human rights of children all around the world. Korea had been receiving support from Unicef for 43 years before that, and since its establishment, Unicef Korea has been doing its best to pay back to other nations in need all the help that Korea itself had received. Well, today it's our honor to be joined on the show by Dr. Oh Jong-nam, the Executive Director of Unicef Korea, to learn more about what Unicef has been doing to realize the hopes and dreams of children. Not only that, we'll look into the remarkable achievements of Dr. Oh that he has made over the years in various fields, including economics, law, education, and a lot more. I'm your host, Walter Foreman. Stay tuned. And kicking off the new season of TBS EFM's Inside Out here on the second week of the new season, another big-name guest hot on the heels after our interview with Howard Bamsey, the Director General of the GGGI. We're very honored today to be joined by the Executive Director of Unicef Korea, Dr. Oh Jong-nam. Good morning and welcome to Inside Out, Dr. Oh.
Thank you.
Well, we heard a lot about you in the brief introduction, so I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about you here during our interview today. And really, that's where I would like to start today with you yourself. You are a very accomplished man with quite a background. You have served as a senior advisor at one of probably Korea's biggest and best-known law firms. You've worked in the Korean government for some probably 30-odd years as an economic bureaucrat. You've worked in the office of the president as economic secretary during the time when I came to Korea during the Kim Dae-jung administration. The list goes on and on and on. How did you then go from all of that to being the executive director of Unicef Korea?
I never dreamed of becoming executive director of Unicef Korea. In the beginning of the last year, I was asked by the president and other board members to serve as executive director for Unicef Korea. And of course, I was reluctant to accept the job because I am busy enough as a senior advisor at Kim and-jang.
Yes.
But president of Unicef Korea was my professor when I was going to law school.
Interesting.
So I couldn't refuse his offer.
Right, even now.
Even now.
After all your accomplishments, you still have to defer to your professor.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, reluctant to take the position, and you said it was just talked about at the beginning of last year. So how long have you been in the position then?
1 year plus.
Just slightly more than 1 year.
Yes.
Well, is it a set term? Is there a limit on how long you will serve, or?
Legally speaking, I am supposed to serve until the end of March next year.
Okay. Well, we presume then that will be the case. I can't see why it wouldn't be. Now, when we list all of your past accomplishments, we might think that the position of Executive Director of UNICEF is a well-compensated position, but it's very interesting to me to learn, and you can correct me if we are wrong in our research here, but the annual salary for the Executive Director of UNICEF Korea is 1 won. Is that correct?
It is correct.
One single won.
Yes.
Can you tell us the story behind that?
I wanted to do it as pro bono.
Yeah, sure.
But the bylaw says executive director has to be paid. So I did compromise. Say I will receive 1 won per year.
Right.
That is the case. So actually I wanted to do it as pro bono.
Yeah, of course. And I guess it's a technicality then.
Technicality.
Yeah,
yes.
technicality. It's interesting. 1 won. I know there are 1 won coins, and I actually keep one with me most of the time. I don't have it today because there used to be, I don't know if there are anymore, but there used to be sales at stores. A 1 won sale where you could buy something like a shirt for 1 won, but only if you had a 1 won coin. So presumably, I guess you're not paid in 1 won coins, are you? You must be paid by bank transfer.
I haven't received at all because in the last year, for the first year, I didn't receive anything.
I see. Oh, you're right. Okay, so you're still expecting your 1 won salary. The banking fee for transferring it would be more than the salary itself.
That's right.
It's quite interesting to learn that. Well, having just served in that position for more than a year, slightly more than a year, as you said, I'd like to ask you about your prior or past connection to Unicef. I'm sure you're aware of the organization, as most of our listeners would be, but is there more to it than that in your case? Does Unicef and Unicef Korea have a sort of special or significant meaning to you personally?
Of course, yes. I was born during the Korean War,
right?
In 1952, and my father passed away when I was 1 year old.
I see.
As a soldier.
I see.
So even if my father heard the news that his son was born, he couldn't come home because it was during the war. So I didn't see my father at all. That was the case. And in my childhood, I vividly remember the aid from Unicef. I tried not to be absent from school because at school we could enjoy food from Unicef.
I see. So the food is distributed at school, and it was clear that it was coming from Unicef.
Yes. We saw the mark.
Right, right.
And pencils, notebooks, we used those sent by Unicef in my childhood. So I owe a lot to Unicef. And not me personally, but my generation as a whole owe a lot to Unicef. Until when? Until the end of 1993. So Unicef came to Korea as a supporter for Korean children in 1950. Then helped Korea until the end of 1993 for 43 years.
Right.
Since the beginning of 1994, UNICEF Korea, officially Korean Committee for UNICEF, we have been repaying the debt to the world for the past 20 years. That is my connection with UNICEF. So I owe a lot to UNICEF. And even if I was asked to be executive director in the beginning of the last year, I was reluctant. But once I took office, I have been so happy to be able to serve, since I feel very much honored to be able to repay the debt we owe to the world, so that UNICEF can implement a lot of programs around the world for those children in need.
Yeah. So just like the children in need in Korea during the war and afterwards, just like yourself in need. Fascinating story to hear that someone as a child in school receiving food, receiving notebooks, receiving pencils has now achieved enough and accomplished enough in his life to become the executive director of that organization. A fantastic story, and it really, really, truly is an honor to have you and to be able to talk to you today, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you give us a taste of the sort of day-to-day life as the executive director of UNICEF Korea? Pardon me. What are some of the things that you do?
Most of the time, I am invited to receive contribution from different organizations, sometimes corporations, sometimes individuals. So that's my main job. Aside from managing the organization, say UNICEF Korea received about $100 million in the last year. So I have to manage the organization as the CEO. And I'm also invited to explain what UNICEF Korea does for potential donors, for students, for different opinion leaders. So that's what I'm doing basically.
You make it sound as though it is very basic, but I'm sure it's very essential and very important work. And with all the other things you do, some of the things we mentioned already, some of the things we will come on to later, it's easy to see why you may have been reluctant to take the position as you are.
Right.
Indeed, very busy, and the position does require a lot of commitment. You mentioned explaining what UNICEF Korea does to potential donors. Can you maybe give us some insight to that? Where do these donations end up? I'm sure they go very different places, but can you give us an overview or a general idea of where people's money goes once it's given to UNICEF and to UNICEF Korea?
Yes, around the world, UNICEF Global has 156 representative offices, while there are 36 national committees for UNICEF, like Korean Committee for UNICEF.
Right.
So 36 national committees are basically collecting money, and 156 representative offices are, say, implementing programs for children in need around the world. So we receive money, and we send money to the UNICEF so that the UNICEF can implement all the programs for children in need.
Right.
That is basically the system.
Sure. And does UNICEF Korea then any longer do work in Korea itself, or is all of its work now focused outside of Korea?
During the first 20 years, pretty much UNICEF Korea focused on collecting money to send to the UNICEF headquarters.
Okay.
But since I took office, I decided to do some more programs inside Korea. Why? Because the basic purpose of UNICEF is not one-fold, but threefold.
Okay.
Number one, survival. We have to help children to survive. That's number one. Number two, protection. In general, children are weak, so sometimes they are abused by adults. I don't need to mention any more. Number three, development. Or I may say education or capacity building. If we help children survive only, then they can be dependent on others lifetime, which is not the case.
Sure.
It shouldn't be the case.
Of course not.
So we have to develop them, or we have to help them build the capacity so that they can become independent.
Right.
So that part and the protection part. So we have been focusing on, say, survival area too much so far for those around the world.
Okay.
But inside Korea, we can do some programs to protect children. We can do programs to educate the children. Say, for example, there are so many children these days among, say, multicultural families.
Yes.
Right? And say they may need some more care after school. So I am thinking of developing some programs for those children of multicultural families.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
I guess it's similar to that old English adage, if you give a person a fish, you feed that person for one day. If you teach them how to fish, you feed them for life. And so I guess you're focusing on teaching how to fish.
Yes. So that's what I have in mind. So, and also we have been criticized by not doing programs inside Korea.
Right.
So far. So I prepared UNICEF Korea Vision 2020. So we review the first 20 years. And we draw lessons from the first 20 years, and we map for the next 20 years.
Right. Well, it is a complaint that is sometimes heard, not specifically about UNICEF, but really about all charities. People will often say, well, why should people give to this charity that's going to help these other people somewhere around the world when maybe we should be doing more here at home, wherever home may be. Of course, in our case today, we're talking about Korea, but that sort of idea is applicable in many areas. And another sort of criticism that does come up is an issue of transparency.
Yes.
And so if I could, I'd like to ask you, how do you address those criticisms, those people who worry about the transparency of what's going on?
I think that is the most important question for any NGOs for the need. So especially it's a UNICEF Korea is for children in need around the world. And from donors' perspective, they want to see any organizations transparent. So if I may, I'd like to explain to you how much we use, say, out of those money donated by donors.
Please do.
If we receive 100, then for the staff remuneration, salary, we spend 2.5, and we spend some money to do programs inside. Say sometimes we have to promote UNICEF Korea, and we have to do some, say, advertisement.
Of course.
Then say altogether 14%. So in the past we used to send about 86% of total donations to UNICEF.
Right.
So I think you can guess how transparent UNICEF Korea is.
Certainly.
Say in comparison with other NGOs in
certainly.
Korea or abroad.
Right. And in talking about this, in talking about the transparency, and talking about where the money ends up, in really everything we've been talking about donors and donations, but I read somewhere that you actually prefer a different word rather than donation.
Yes.
Can you tell us what word you prefer and why?
Of course, I appreciate donation.
Yes.
But I'd rather prefer sharing.
Sharing.
Donation means, say, giving some money to others. But sharing means I share what I have with others in need, including your warm heart. So from that, say, you not only give material things to those in need, but also you really think how to help them become independent,
right.
including education,
sure,
including protection. So that's what I have in mind. I am doing this job because I feel obligated. But I say can only repay the debt by sharing what I have with other children around the world in need. So that's my concept.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely can see that concept very crystal clear, because, again, I have the image of you as a young child in school taking notes in a notebook with a pencil from Unicef. And now as the executive director, I hope that there are children elsewhere in the world doing exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And they're doing that now because of your actions. And so it is very cyclical in nature. It is that cycle. And hopefully people can do that at all levels. You don't have to become the executive director to continue that cycle. People can do that at all levels. All levels, absolutely, indeed. When you talked about your roles, you listed several roles. One of them you mentioned was receiving the contributions or the sharings and meeting the people or sometimes the corporations. Can you tell us maybe a memory of an individual or a corporation or one of those instances when you met the donors that really stands out in your mind?
Some time ago, before I assumed the post of executive director, I was on the board of directors.
Right, yes.
Right? So I joined UNICEF board of directors in 2009.
Right.
And in 2010, I was invited to join the ceremony, a special donation ceremony. So one lady called Ms. Park Yang-soo.
Okay.
She wanted to donate some money to UNICEF Korea. And I was invited to attend the ceremony. And I did. What a surprise. She brought the amount of 10 billion won.
10 billion won.
In cash.
In cash?
In cash.
Wow. That must have been a large suitcase.
No, just say,
a supio, a check. Yeah.
And which from one individual.
Right, yeah, Miss Pang.
She brought 10 billion won.
Right.
Which is, what is more important is what she said. Well, say, while young, I used to teach. So I know the importance of education for individuals, for the world. So I want this money to be used educating children.
Yeah.
Around the world, especially in Asia. I thought, say, a little bit differently.
Really?
10 billion won is big.
Yes.
But to educate children in need around the world, it's not big at all.
I see,
So
yeah.
is it really feasible?
I see.
Her dream is really feasible. But at the end of the day, Unicef created a program called Schools for Asia.
Schools for Asia.
Yes. There was a program called Schools for Africa initiated by President Mandela.
I see.
And this money became a seed for Schools for Asia program, which is one of two important education pillars of UNICEF. So her money became a seed for Schools for Asia program.
Yeah.
And now we are receiving so much water and fertilizers
to grow that seed.
To grow the seed.
Yes.
So these days, we see so many schools founded by UNICEF thanks to her contribution in 2010. So Schools for Asia is a Korean brand.
Fantastic. Started by the donation of
Mrs. Park Yang-suk.
Yeah, fantastic.
How wonderful it is.
It is very wonderful. And you know, the whole time that you were telling me the story, I was listening intently and at the same time trying to do the math. I think that's 100억 won.
Yes,
right?
100억 won, yes.
Just for context.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Tremendous. And a tremendous place, I think, for us, sir, to take a break. There's lots more that we'd like to talk about with you, and I think there's not much more we can say now until we take a break, so we'll do that. We'll come back with more of our conversation with the Executive Director of Unicef Korea, Oh Jong-nam, in just a moment.
Korea's #1 foreign language station. Coming to you from the heart of Seoul. 101.3 TBS EFM.
Lots more to talk about in our conversation today with the Executive Director of Unicef Korea, Dr. Oh Jong-nam, coming up next. And welcome back to part 2 of our conversation today with the Executive Director of Unicef Korea, the man sitting directly here in the studio today on my left. And what a man indeed he is, and it is certainly a pleasure to be able to talk to him this morning. I am talking about our guest, Dr. Oh Jong-nam. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you.
Well, for anyone who didn't join us in the first half, they missed a fascinating first half, and it ended with this tremendous story of Ms. Park Yang-suk donating 10 billion won, 100억 won. Fantastic story. And you said that ended up seeding the Schools for Asia program. Can you tell us more about that Schools for Asia program? How does it work, and where does money go? Let's say, for example, someone comes to you and they want to donate 100 million won, 100억 won.
Okay.
What would happen in that case?
So my role is to make a story, to interpret the money the donor donates to the UNICEF or UNICEF Korea. Say, for example, when I receive 1억 won, 100 million won from someone, then I have to show him what it means.
Right.
So in terms of building classrooms for those children, say, who cannot go to school. 100 million won in Korea cannot do much in terms of building classrooms.
Sure.
But we are talking about developing countries,
Right.
not developed countries
Right.
or advanced countries.
Right.
When we go to developing countries where the price level is cheap, we can build 7 classrooms for 60 students with 1억 won.
With 100 million won.
So 420 young children can enjoy schooling thanks to that 1억 won. How wonderful it is.
Absolutely wonderful.
Say I was born in a rural area. I may not have gone to middle school or elementary school, but thanks to my mother's commitment to her son's education, I am here now. So if there had not been 100 million won, 420 children may not be able to go to school.
Exactly right.
So how meaningful it is to donate 100 million won to Unicef Korea so that Unicef can build 7 classrooms for 60 children.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm trying to tell my thankful donors.
Yeah. And you know, something I like to do very often to really give our listeners some insight, because of course they're listening to us today on the radio. They don't have the benefit of seeing you. But I can see you, and I can see the way your face lights up when you're telling that story. You know, you gave us your age. You told us you were born in 1952. We can figure out how old you are. But as you tell that story, sir, the look on your face, you get younger as you tell the story, because I can see the sincerity and almost the excitement in your face as you tell the story. It's fascinating to hear it, and it's even a better honor to have the chance to see it here with you in the studio today.
Thank you.
I'd like to come on to talking a little bit more about you. We mentioned at the top of the interview some of the things that you're currently doing, some of the things that you have done as well. Something we didn't mention, but I think it's very interesting, is something else you've done in the past, and that's your work with the International Monetary Fund.
Yes.
You were involved with that organization back in 99, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So 1999 is just a couple of years after 1997,
That's right.
Obviously, an era which is often called IMF.
IMF crisis.
Yes, in Korea. So can you tell us, what was your role at the IMF at that time? And I can't imagine it being an easy one. How did you manage to do what needed to be done during those difficult times?
I was on the board of IMF. So I was alternate executive director at the time.
In 97?
In 1999.
In 99.
In 1997, during the crisis, I was in charge of international economic policy in the Ministry of Finance and the Economy.
I see.
So, say, when Mr. Kamdish, managing director of the IMF, came to Korea, I was to welcome him at the airport, and I had to see him up at the airport. So, from the beginning to the end, I had to, say, take care of him.
Yeah.
And not only Mr. Kamdish, Mr. say, Wolfenson from the World Bank, Mr. Johnston from the OECD, say, I was in charge of, say, welcoming them and seeing them off. So during that period, say, I became a friend of Mr. Kamdish, and he wanted to see me at the executive board of the IMF.
I see.
But right after President Kim Dae-jung was elected, I was invited to become one of his economic advisors.
I see.
So I joined him at the inauguration, and I was in charge of 재벌 restructuring. So I was very much notorious back then. So you know how hard it was during the financial crisis. 재벌 restructuring was, right? So sometimes I was quoted as a man without blood, so I had to check my blood. But say it was so successful, as you remember.
Sure, Korea was one of the first countries to drag itself out of that crisis and not just drag itself out, but also recover quickly and strongly.
Right.
Sure.
So then, say, in September 1999, say, I joined the IMF Executive Board as alternate, because back then, Korea only could represent as alternate executive director.
I see.
And Australia used to represent Korea as executive director.
Interesting.
Because we were not so big at the time.
Right.
So I had to represent Korea at the executive board, and I had to defend our positions at the board. Then, say, during my tenure as alternate executive director, then I negotiated with the Australian authorities. You have been representing Korea and your own country,
Right.
say, from the beginning until now. Now is the time for us to share some time. So they agreed on. Then, say, I never expected to become executive director of the IMF in 2004 myself. Say, when I was negotiating with the Australian authorities, I didn't expect me to become ED, but say, life is such. So in 2004, then I became executive director representing not only Korea, but also other Asia Pacific members. 14 members I used to represent, including Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, Mongolia, say, etc. That was the case. So that was the case. That was the way I was. I served at the executive board of the IMF twice. Once as alternate executive director, next the first Korean executive director. That was the case.
Yeah, you know, a fascinating story, and I think that in itself is something that we could probably talk about for an hour, as we generally have an hour here on Inside Out. You know, what was having to be done to do the J-Bal restructuring during those times. Can you give us, in a nutshell, an interesting anecdote from those times? Something that stands out in your memory, either as a good or bad memory?
I mean, very simple. Say to the listeners today, say J-Bal restructuring was very simple. Number one, you have to lower debt equity ratio from over 400% to 200%.
Okay.
Because in general, the corporations used to borrow too much money. Right? Say, to expand. Number two, you have to correct the governance structure. Say, regardless of the share they have, the owners of J-Bals used to govern the corporations, say...
Yeah, through various ways. That were stock options were being held different ways. Right. It's almost like a maze. Yes.
So those are two things we try to do. Say, lowering that equity ratio and correcting the governance structure.
Sure.
By doing so, even Daewoo, one of top 5 J-Bals, went bankrupt.
Right.
But all the others became globally more competitive. Thanks to that painful restructuring process, after 2008 global recession, Korea became the first nation which could recover from the global recession faster than any other, say, advanced economies.
Lessons learned.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So that is the case, to simply put.
Well, it seems to be maybe a case of easier said than done, but obviously there had to have been some results coming from those because, as you said, not only the 97 crisis, but also then the 2008 economic downturn, as I think it was officially called. Well, thankfully, you were there, and many others, of course, to work our way through that very difficult time. It's very interesting to me. Korea is often described as a dichotomy. There's the old and the new existing together in one place, especially here in Seoul. And what's very interesting to me about you is I think you have a little bit of that as well. And of course, I'm not talking about new and old, but I'm talking about your current work now being so generous in Unicef Korea, but then also having to be very, very powerful and strict and dealing with, a man with no blood, as you said. So very, very interesting that you yourself are maybe a model of the dichotomy that exists throughout Seoul and throughout Korea.
In me?
Yeah.
Personally, yes.
Have you heard that before?
Yes.
I didn't think I'd be the first, but it's interesting to see it firsthand, if nothing else. Getting back to some of your accomplishments, you are also an author, having written several books, at least two that I know of, and at least one that I'm very fortunate to be holding here in my hand today. Thank you very much for that.
You.
Not only the book, but the inscription as well. Tell us about this book. It's your most recent one, is it?
Yes, the most recent.
The title I have here in English, and it's probably an unofficial translation, so Dr. Oh, I'll let you give us the Korean title as well. In English, I have it here as Prepare for Retirement and the Next 30 Years Thereafter.
That's correct.
All right.
Yes,
and in Korean, sir?
은퇴 후 30년을 준비하라.
Okay. Well, tell us about the book. I have to be honest, it's a slim book, which is probably important these days. What are we going to learn from reading this book?
For the first 2 years, it became one of bestsellers. Now it has become a steady seller.
Okay.
It's 18th edition. 18th printing.
Wow.
Printing, yes. So the story is very simple. Number one, I experienced hunger. Now I am on a diet. I'm not talking about person. My generation experienced hunger.
Yeah.
Say, our morning greeting in the past. Not good morning.
Right. Did you eat? Have you eaten?
Did you have breakfast?
Right.
So that was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So don't run. It shall make you hungry.
Mm-hmm.
That was what we used to hear.
Interesting.
Now, we see so many people jogging, not only in the morning, but also in the evening to be on a diet. The problem is, even if we experienced both things in one generation, the problem is we live too long. And we have to retire before 60 years old, which means our life expectancy became these days 81.
80, yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
And it used to be 52 in 1960, 50 years ago. So over the past 50 years or so, 30 years extended. Added.
Yeah.
Which means I will live up to 90 years old, or if I am unlucky, probably 100 years old.
Interesting perspective.
But my friends, fortunately, I'm active. I thank God for that. But many of my friends retired, and they cannot make any labor income. So they have to live depending on their assets. But are they really ready to live, to depend on their properties without any labor income? That is my point. And these days, the birth rate, so-called, the total fertility rate, is about 1.2.
1.2 if we're lucky, right?
Right. So that is the case. So you cannot depend on your children anymore. So you have to depend on yourself, but you are not prepared for retirement or for the next 30 years. That is my point.
So is it safe to say then, Dr. O, that you are practicing what you've written here in this book yourself? And if so, can you give us an example of that?
If I say yes, I may sound arrogant, but I have been trying to,
fair enough.
Trying to prepare for my retirement and 30 years thereafter. I can say I'm following.
It's still a work in process.
It's still a working process.
Because again, you gave us your birth year, so we can quickly work out that you must be close to 62, so close to the retirement age. But very clear that you are far from retirement, given all the things that you have done. You've also, there's another book. I'm not sure how many books do you have to your credit?
Relating to life, two books. But
two books related to life.
Relating to economics, so many.
Right, of course, because that was your professional,
my
academic background. But more recently, focusing on life. And you have another book here.
Koreans, Your Future.
Right. 한국인 당신의 미래. Right. Can you tell us about that book?
I became Commissioner of Statistics Korea, U.S. Census Bureau.
Right. 통계청.
통계청.
네.
In 2002, when I became 50 years old, and I was thinking of my future. Now I am 50, and even if I serve as minister, not many years left. Then what should I do after retirement?
Yeah.
So I decided to write a book about Korean studies because I was invited to become a professor in the U.S. So I was writing a book, and I found two interesting phenomena.
In Korea?
In Korea.
All right.
One, I already explained. Koreans' life expectancy get extended very rapidly.
Yeah, very rapidly.
Very rapidly. Number two, Korea's total fertility rate fell below the replacement ratio,
Right.
which is 2,
Yeah.
in 1983. Since then, it keeps lowering, declining.
Yeah.
So when I was writing a book, 1.2, in 2001.
That's right, yeah.
So what do you have? I came up with one new life cycle. I created that. Triple 30s.
Triple 30s.
Yes.
All right.
30, 30, 30. You are dependent on your parents for the first 30 years, in a sense.
Yeah.
Then say you are helping your children for the next 30 years.
Right.
And you retire around at the age of 60.
Yeah.
Then say you have to live in your own. Are you ready for that? That is my question. So Koreans, your future means you are going to live another 30 years after retirement. Because in general, in the past, not triple 30s, but 30 plus alpha being very small.
Right.
The residual.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Once you celebrate your 60th birthday, then say your life.
Well, sure, that's why the 60th birthday is quite a large celebration in Korea.
It used to be quite a lot.
Absolutely,
right?
sure.
But these days, nobody celebrates 60th birthday. Or 70th birthday.
Because it's commonplace.
It's common.
Yeah.
It's common.
Sure.
So, in that sense, I wanted to warn my friends, my fellows, you have to be prepared for yourself. So I decided not to go to the U.S. To become a professor because I wanted to warn my fellows first instead of teaching U.S. say students.
Well, very good. And I'm sure the country thanks you for that. I'm absolutely sure of that. And speaking of the country, I think that I would be remiss if I didn't use this opportunity to try to draw from you, Dr. O, some advice for any of the listeners who are out there who are wanting to get involved with NGOs. And, I think there are a lot of people who want to do that. What advice might you give somebody who wants to get involved with an NGO, with something like Unicef, with United Nations, whatever it may be, big scale, small scale? What advice could you give to the listeners?
Working for NGOs. Basically, working for NGOs means you want to help others rather than you help yourself. Which means if you take that position as a job to make money, to make a living, say you may be disappointed.
Okay.
So you have to feel happy by helping others. So in my case, I'm very, cautious about saying this, but I feel I have been blessed enough, since my life, during my lifetime, always I have been receiving more than I deserve. That's what I feel. So I'd like to repay the debt to the community by doing something for the society. That's why I can serve as a pro bono. But I cannot ask everybody to do the same. So depending upon your situation, you may choose to work for NGOs or you may choose to work for a living. But please do not choose to work for NGOs for a living.
For a living, right.
Right. So that is, or if you choose, you have to lower your expectation in terms of monetary reward.
Well, it sounds as though there needs to be more of an intrinsic motivation, more of an altruistic reason, a calling, if you will. And certainly in your case, that's very well what it may have been. And I'd also like to come back to UNICEF Korea itself. We've heard now a couple of times that 2014 marks its 20th anniversary. Can you give us an idea of maybe what is being done to mark that anniversary? What will UNICEF Korea be doing in 2014 to mark those 20 years and some of the projects that it's working on?
So far, I think UNICEF Korea has been doing excellent job.
Of course.
Because in terms of contribution to the UNICEF, it ranked the 4th in 2012 out of 36 national committees. In the last year, the official count didn't come out yet, but we assume UNICEF Korea ranked the third.
The third, all right.
In terms of contribution amount. That's fine. But as I mentioned before, it's not the whole mission of the UNICEF.
Right.
Say collecting money is one pillar.
Yep.
And we have other pillars to help children.
Protection.
Protection and development.
Yep.
So in the years to come, KCU Vision 2020, for the next 20 years, I'd like to develop some programs to protect children in Korea and to develop children's capacity. Having said that, I'd like to mention one special thing.
Okay. Please do, sir.
When I was born in 1952, South Korea was worse off than North Korea.
Yeah.
Now, we cannot compare. So we see so many children in North Korea. Ethnically, we are the same. But you know what's happening in North Korea? Nutrition shortage is not enough. The word nutrition shortage is not enough. Do you know the word stunting?
Yes, the growth being less because of not enough calories.
Yes, not enough calories. So from the conception of a child until 2 years old, about 1,000 days. If nutrition is not enough, then the growth doesn't
become stunted.
Becomes stunted.
Yeah.
1/3 of children in North Korea are now experiencing stunting. So I'm not talking about the regime. I'm not talking about the people at the top in North Korea. I'm talking about innocent children in North Korea who are experiencing, unfortunately, stunting. So if we live another 20 years in this situation, probably those children will become grown-ups, and we may be different in terms of ethnic background.
Yeah.
So I'd like to suggest, whatever happens to the regime, we have to feed them so that they can avoid stunting. That's one specific point I'd like to mention at this juncture.
Well, Dr. O, I'm very glad that you did, because when we went to a break in the first part of our conversation, I thought it was at a very apropos point. And I think today that is a very apropos point upon which to end our conversation today. I can see the passion in your face as you tell the story about trying to prevent stunting in North Korea. I thank you for that, and I thank you for everything that you shared with us and with the listeners today here on Inside Out. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we have been speaking with Dr. Oh Jong-nam, the Executive Director of UNICEF Korea. And big thanks to our guest today, and of course big thanks to you, the listener, for tuning in, and we invite you to tune in again next week, Saturday, 9:05, for more of TBS EFM's Inside Out. Until then, I'm your host, Walter Foreman.